is more interesting to me is actually finding a way to operationalize open source in a new way that creates new value. All of open source's value is essentially squeezed unless you're trying to retrain models that have already read all of our code and trained up on them and sell that back to us the second or third time.
Hello, welcome to DevTools-fm. This is a podcast about developer tools and the people who make them. I'm Andrew, and this is my co-host, Justin.
Hey, everyone. We're really excited to have Darcy Clarke joining us. Darcy, you've done a lot of things in your career. Right now, you are working on this thing called VoLT or VLT. Do you say VoLT or do you say VLT?
I get people to say the name twice, which is great. So however you want to say it, it's awesome. It's great branding, great marketing. VLT, VoLT, whichever way you'd like to say it. We enjoy both forms.
Sweet. Well, Andrew and I are both lovers of JavaScript and of the ecosystem. So we're interested to talk to you more about what you're building. Before we dive into that, though, would you mind telling our listeners a little bit more about yourself?
Sure. I'm the CEO of VoLT, CEO and founder. Formerly was the staff engineering manager at NPM, was acquired by GitHub in 2020. And spent a good number of years there at GitHub, helped manage the GitHub CLI team there, as well as the NPM CLI team. And historically have had a number of different jobs, did consulting for a number of years, but also helped lead engineering teams in some capacity. Started a few companies in my early 20s as well. One specifically that's still around is a company called Themify, was building commercial WordPress themes. So I used to sling some PHP back in my day. And built some theme frameworks, and I've sort of stepped away from that ecosystem, and it seems like I did so at a good time given the current chaos that's happening in the WordPress ecosystem. But yeah, I've been a long time lover of JavaScript and contributor to the open source ecosystem and foundations for a long time. So been slinging JS for 20 plus years.
So it seems like you have a lot of experience in package managers, but I'm sure the top question on everybody's mind is, why do we need another one? What is VLT and what sets it apart from the pack?
Yeah, so I did the crazy thing, started a company based around some open source ideas I had, and decided to pull along my friends and former teammates. Isaac Schluter, who I think has been on the podcast before, the creator of NPM. I stole him away from, his side projects at the time and got our team back together pretty much. Roy Adorno, who was also with me at NPM and then GitHub, also joined us, poached him from Google, and then Luke Karras as well, who was on our team. We poached him directly from GitHub and brought him into VoLT. And the reason why is really, there's a few different reasons, but I think the big one is just most package managers are just clients. They are still sort of bound to the legacy infrastructure that is NPM and the legacy APIs that NPM provides to you. So there's not a lot of innovation happening on the backend or the infrastructure side. And so I spent a number of years focused on sort of products and engineering on the client and saw all these opportunities that if we had the right APIs, we could actually really push upstream some of the problems. And I think the opportunities were sort of further upstream in terms of how we could provide new services for the ecosystem. So that's the big rock that I think that we're pushing. And I think it's the differentiator that going forward is that, we'll be providing our own services and our own registry here very shortly.
Package management in JavaScript is complicated. Which I'm sure nobody knows that better than you. But I feel like it's only getting more complicated. So we have a proliferation of runtimes. So Dino and Bun are two very prominent runtimes now, alongside Node as sort of like server-side runtimes. Obviously, browsers continue to advance. We have ESM. So now we have a new registry, JSR. Who knows if Bun's going to do their own registry or what that looks like. And as the Dino team has sort of communicated, compatibility in the ecosystem actually becomes really important. So if someone's using NPM, being able to install a package from JSR became like an important thing for them. And I assume that that's going to be a similar situation with what you're building, but you are explicitly trying to go like an NPM compatible route. So frame the context and the storytelling behind like what, not just like what the technical opportunity here is, but like what is the real value that like having another package manager can unlock, or maybe not even just package managers, maybe just the wrong terminology, but however you would explain it, like what is the real value unlocked that you're trying to push for?
Yeah, what I would say is like we could use the term client. So what are the for the client side, when we talk about clients, NPM, PNPM. NPM is a lot of things, but the NPM client is sort of the de facto first party client to the service that is the NPM registry, public registry. And so, Yarn and PNPM, and now Bun and Dino, they all have their own clients that essentially can communicate with NPM compatible registries. And what that means is there's this very poorly defined documentation around what the APIs are that would make you an NPM compatible registry. I screamed into a void for a number of years to try to get us to document this API, because there's actually very few folks that have done the work to go look at actually what the NPM first party client does, and then basically reverse engineer what those APIs and expected responses are. So there's no like open API doc sitting somewhere that folks can use to be like, hey, this is what I can expect to either scaffold for myself to build a registry, or that I can use to build a client. And so I think that I guess you're sort of saying what's the opportunity here, and in terms of compatibility, we really have to look at like what the core primitive is that we're sharing today. And that is, the de facto standard that NPM created, which is a package JSON really. A package to NPM is just any tarball that has a package JSON in it. Doesn't need a README. It doesn't need any other contents. It just needs like a valid JSON file that's called package JSON in the root. And specifically, there's two fields that need to be there, the name and version. That was not even the case recently. And we can get into this later, but I surfaced a pretty serious bug in terms of the public registry not validating the contents of the packages. So historically, the NPM ecosystem, in terms of the things that we're sharing, it's these packages. And so that sort of core primitive is the thing that I think is going to continue no matter what. And you see, even with JSR, they've created essentially an interface for anybody to consume a JSR package via sort of an NPM-like service that transforms the projects into packages. Like, so a project that has a package JSON, whether or not you're using just the Dino JSON config, they'll sort of mutate or transform the project so it can be consumed by, these other clients. So there's some compatibility that they've baked into the registry. And I think that's going to have to continue. We've actually done the same thing with VSR. We have a pretty, we are basically giving you an NPM compatible registry.
So focusing on the client a little more, as Justin was saying, JavaScript's gotten pretty complicated. It might not just be one package and one repo. Typically we work with monorepos. So does Volt help me build monorepos? Is it just focused more on like a subset of use cases? Like, what are you guys aiming for here?
Yeah. So by default, we have workspace support or monorepo support. And actually we do, with a few of the different capabilities inside of the Volt client, we do support other package managed project types. So PNPM, you can be using a PNPM to manage your dependencies, and you can use the Volt GUI to actually explore your project, which we thought was interesting use case. And so, yeah, workspaces are definitely first class in terms of how we want to support them. We have taken a similar approach to how PNPM basically took a importer type strategy. NPM, when I was there, we actually implemented NPM workspaces in V7. It was one of those things that was a long outstanding need from 2016 when when Yarn sort of introduced workspaces. It took us a long time to get there, but that was sort of tacked on to NPM. And so you could really tell the APIs weren't native to the client. And we're taking a bit more of a holistic strategy with how we look at not just workspaces, but dependency traversing, all together. And that starts with having sort of a holistic understanding of your dependency graph and your projects. And the way that we're doing that is by treating your dependency graph just like you would the DOM. So instead of, in the front end, you have the document object model, which is created by browser based on your HTML markup. Well, we believe, there's something out there like your dependency object model where you could essentially traverse all your dependencies in a standardized way, or at least the way that we believe can be standardized, and use a common language to essentially traverse that graph. And so we've created a dependency selector syntax that essentially mimics what CSS looks like to the DOM, and essentially having primitives on the nodes, like the type, let's say like a dependency is a workspace or it's not a workspace, makes it really easy for you to write a selector essentially that allows you to filter your dependencies for the purpose of running tasks or doing installations. And so instead of having sort of tacked on flags for all your subcommands to run, scripts or to install, dependencies into one project or another, you get sort of a common language that can be used across the entire tool.
So for a concrete example, like in our monorepo, we have a bunch of scripts that we like to run in CI, but installing the dependencies for those scripts kind of requires a lot of work. If you want to do it the right way, what we ended up doing is throwing them in a workspace and then filtering the install by saying just install the dependencies in that workspace. That's a lot of work and is not a fun way to code. Does this query syntax kind of help me not do that and like rely on the queries more so?
Totally. That's the idea. We're coming up with like a broad set of, I say broad, there's essentially like three types of queries that are supported by pretty much every command. And it's the context in which you're executing command, whether it's install, it's run, it's exec. Those are all supported by Volt today, or whether it's the target. So it's very similar to, if you imagine, and I like to always leverage like the web platform. It's like essentially event handling, right? So when you're considering like, what's the target, what's the context or the scope, and these two things can be set for every command. And I can imagine you could set using query syntax a very broad set of dependencies. And the great thing about this is that it's super expressive. It's just like CSS, although I know many folks have moved to Tailwind and have forgotten how to write a CSS selector. But you can essentially just write a CSS selector utilizing all this metadata about your dependencies, and you can do something that I don't think is possible with just the sort of legacy arguments for like prod versus dev versus, optional dependency flagging and filtering. I will give a shout out to PNPM's filter flag if you've ever used it in projects. I know a lot of folks use PNPM for monorepos. I think they've done a pretty good job with that filter, but I still think it actually suffers from a lot of the limitations of not having, a actual query language.
This is like pretty interesting. I think there's a lot of tooling out in the ecosystem that re-implements package resolution or whatever. I know that I've used an NPM module before that was just written by someone random that like kind of does this. It's like figure out like how Node would resolve something or whatever, and like try to slap together a script to find versions or whatever. So I like that. I like this query command for sure. That's very interesting for like maintenance tasks. Maybe that like plays into another thing. I noticed that you have a mermaid command, which is cool for visualization. So if you like want to write some rule and like see the visualization of like, okay, here are like maybe the direct dependencies or the transitive dependencies of this like one package or something, it'd be like really interesting way to view that.
We'd like to stop and thank our sponsor for this week, but we don't have one. So if you'd like to sponsor DevTools-fm, head over to devtools-fm/sponsor to apply. And if you want to find another way to support the podcast, head over to shop.devtools.fm, where you can buy some merch and rep the podcast. With that, though, let's get back to the episode.
But you have a GUI that you're showing some of the stuff in and giving more capabilities for. And I think that GUI is like a sort of a next level of like a vision of what this client could be or what a holistic client could be. So what are your goals there? What are you trying to do? And what does it do today?
Yeah. So we kind of went back to first principles in terms of what we wanted ourselves. I know I consider myself to be a full stack developer. I used to love to, I aspired to be a unicorn in that I, was doing front end as well as back end. I've always been really jealous of the developer tools experience we have in the browser. And so the GUI experience for us was a way to try to unlock what I felt like we had been hiding from so many developers, at least in the server-side JS realm, where I'm sure you've seen the meme, the most massive thing in the universe is your node modules, like this black hole, and then it's your node modules folder. That always made me sad, as somebody who was like leading the charge with NPM, and I turned around the ship a bit there. We had gained, better adoption. I always felt we did a disservice to the ecosystem by not allowing developers to feel inquisitive and learn more about what was in node modules. It should not be a black box, essentially. And so the GUI is really a mechanism for you to explore and actually see why something is installed. It's also a visual way of traversing your dependency graph that isn't some sort of like very large, octopus looking, dependency graph. It's actually, it's a interesting sort of 3-column traversal for nodes, like edges in and edges out for nodes in that graph. So we actually think it's a really unique way to visualize nodes in your project or your dependency graph. And so you can see your dependencies on the right-hand side, the currently selected dependency or the list of dependencies that are selected, and then any ancestry. So you can quickly click around and navigate. The really interesting part here is that as you're clicking around and using the GUI, is that we update the query selector. So if you're not very familiar with CSS, let's say, you are basically given a breadcrumb for how, to essentially find that exact same query again. And you can share that with your team. You can essentially use it again in, running tasks or, using it to filter projects for any kind of reason. We look at it as sort of like the first step towards like making it super easy for you to build reusable sort of queries in the future. And we're doing some work right now to make that experience even better. But yeah, we think the GUI is just the getting started in terms of the opportunities of essentially appending even more and more metadata to each one of the views that you see for your dependencies. So we can pull in information from Socket. I'm sure you know those folks, or other kinds of information from, the third-party registries like downloads, counts, etc. So we imagine that to get more and more, be like more of a rich experience than you see today with like the NPM registries, public facing website.
Yeah, I was playing around with it, and like immediately I found the use for it because I was just like installing random dependencies to see what the lock file looked like and just kind of like gauge what was happening. And I accidentally installed next.js instead of next.js. And because of the tool, it was like immediately apparent that, oh, this is just like some random library that somebody put out that has no relation to what I was actually wanting to install. So like, I can see like there's so many layers that you could add on top of that to make that experience even more awesome.
Yeah, we think we're just getting started with it. Like we're super excited about what we'll be rolling out. Like there's so many, what we consider to be like, there's 1,000 paper cuts. I know my good friend Wes Boss was yelling about not having, sorting by downloads counts from the NPM public registry. Things like that are essentially just pieces of metadata that we can, again, append to these sort of, nodes that then we can give you a way to, in a selector, a reasonable sort of mechanism for sorting by or finding, let's say, dependencies that have greater than or less than a certain number of downloads potentially, right? So we've added a bunch of pseudo classes and pseudo selectors essentially that are bespoke to, our use cases. But we imagine there's even more like, download counts or, in the case of, let's say a typo squat, we can pull in information from third parties that are willing to integrate with us, including someone like Socket, to grab that kind of metadata and then provide you with, again, a way to filter or sort or search for that. So, really laying the foundation with query selector syntax and the dependency graph, we can just provide a great visual experience that plays with those tools under the hood.
A good use case for this, it makes me think back. So we had Jordan Harband on a while back, and he was sort of making the case that it's like not about the number of packages that you have as dependencies, but it's about the number of people who like maintain those packages, the like chain of trust. It's like how many people are involved, and like, wouldn't be necessarily a trivial thing to just like, query all my packages and transitive dependencies and tell me like, what is the complete set of like authors or, of these packages. And I feel like something like this could do that. And especially if you're, down the line, if you do a lot of enriching information like GitHub metadata or something like that you can pull in and integrate with it too. It's like, that can be really compelling.
Yeah, I think the use case you just brought up there for discovering authors or contributors to packages, that kind of metadata, you hear that different use case in many different shapes and forms. Like there was, I think, 5 or 6 different commands in the NPM CLI that all did the same thing. They were essentially just taking different slices of the pie, like different a use case for finding all my outdated dependencies or the use case of, listing all my vulnerable dependencies, right? So, people came to us asking, can I list all the licenses of all my dependencies? And all of these are just different sort of slices of doing a query and having a different view or shape of the output of that data. And so by providing a really like expressive and I think fundamental new language, I think we can unlock a lot of, a lot of use cases we haven't even thought about. So like just providing a way for you to get that metadata or search by that metadata is I think going to unlock things for the ecosystem. So we aren't the blocker anymore. You're not waiting for somebody to implement a new flag or a new command to get, all the authors, list all the authors of all their dependencies.
So something the docs calls out a few different times is secure. So what does secure mean in the context of the VLT client?
So security in context of the client is not as important as security in the context of the registry and the infrastructure. And so clients are beholden to the network, and what you'll find is, and I experienced this firsthand at GitHub. There's so many times that people want to file issues against the clients that I managed, both the GitHub CLI and the NPM CLI. Folks constantly tried to tell us that we had bugs or security issues with the clients, but there's inherently a trust model that basically says if your network is compromised, like your client is going to be interacting with a compromised network. There are integrity checks baked into since 2016, 2017, lock files have existed, and there's integrity checks baked into pretty much all clients. That's the mechanism we have today in terms of storing and validating the package you expect to be downloaded is the one you downloaded, but we don't do anything beyond that. Many clients, basically you're beholden to the configured registry. In terms of security, where we're maybe deviating from what the NPM public registry does and what some other, enterprise registry providers have been doing is we're actually doing manifest validation and the package to prevent what's called manifest confusion, validating that actually the manifest and the integrity, or the manifest and the package JSON that was shipped in the tarball has the same values, same set of values and keys. We basically throw out the manifest because it can be essentially manipulated during a publish. And so those two things can be not the same. And so you end up with essentially corrupted caches, or the clients don't know which to essentially use when you're deciding to install dependencies or run scripts for a package. So the source of truth should be the thing that was actually signed. And that is the package tarball. So if there's any other client authors out there or package managers authors out there that are listening, like, please, I implore you to throw out the manifest information and extract the actual contents from packages. So that's security, I guess.
This is a good lead in to VSR, which is the registry service. You're kind of like talking about this with security implications and thinking about like how security is handled a lot on the registry side. So we'll dive in and talk about some more features, but why don't you give us like an overview of VSR and maybe how it compares to some of the other like NPM compatible registries?
Yeah. So VSR, we looked at what was out there, and there's a few enterprise offerings, Nexus, SonType's Nexus product, and JFrog's Artifactory. The price points, yeah, I see some shaking heads. If you've ever used these, you'll know both how clunky they can be. Some of the actual implementation details can muddy the waters for folks. You can essentially do something which allows you to proxy or intercept and conflate packages, which I think is again almost like a bad practice or potential for security issues for teams. And you see this with dependency confusion attacks and things like that. And so at least with providing our own registry software, we decided that we want to open source it. Or I should not say open source. We want to fair source a product. So the VSR code is essentially a fair sourced licensed NPM compatible registry that you could host yourself if you want to, for private packages or for your team. And it's serverless by default. So the overhead of actually running it is like super minimal. That was another, something that I heard time and time again was how painstaking it was to spin up, the only other two alternatives that I know of in this space. It is sort of competitive with, Verdaccio, is the only other, I think, true, sort of open source or free registry proxy or self-hosting tool. And yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunities with being, having it out there and available to the ecosystem to both contribute to, collaborate on. I think it shines light on what we're doing internally in the code. So, again, ideally that's more secure. But we're also going to, work closer with the ecosystem in terms of how we develop it. So, the opportunity here is to improve and adapt the endpoints and APIs that are actually in the infrastructure, meaning that we can build something that, doesn't stagnate like the NPM public registry sort of has for the last decade or so. So opportunity to both, build something that's more secure, ideally at a price point that's way more competitive that you can imagine those enterprise registry clients or registries are. And, also improvements to the clients that interface with it.
Yeah, I had the opportunity to work with Artifactory a few years ago, and not a fun experience. We like to publish packages a lot, and at some point their registry just stopped working, and they were like, "Oh, you published too many packages. You need to start deleting some." Yeah, that was the look on our faces too. We were very surprised. So it's nice to know that somebody's thinking about making a good version of this and it happens to be from the people who make npm. So it's a little more trustworthy that they're going to shake things out right.
Yeah, I thought it was the biggest miss. I mentioned that there was a lack of documentation for the registry. I thought it was the biggest miss that people had to, the Verdaccio project is a perfect example of folks really having to work hard to try to reverse engineer what it means to self-host an npm instance or npm compatible instance. And so I don't want to have that happen again. So we're starting out with this fair source model that allows everybody to see exactly what we're building and can as long as you're not competitive, there's no competitive use, then you can essentially use and host one of the instances yourself. This is a similar model to Sentry. Sentry sort of has coined the fair source license, and we're using that for VSR today. We also do provide a managed version of the VSR instance and have a few different primary use cases, both for folks that are selling their own software, but also for folks that want to move off of either npm private packages, which were actually cheaper than, as well as folks that are using Artifactory or Nexus.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, I think there is a lot of opportunity in this space. So, it's like things that you list out in your docs, but specifically, like if you have a team that's wanting to use a private registry as a distribution channel, a lot of the tools out there are not built for that. They're not designed for third-party access to a private registry. It's assumed either public or private. And you have folks who go through this process, I don't know, just trying to work that out and doing a lot of weird things. And so that's an interesting model. And of course, there's like all the things that come with enterprise, like compliance, observability, and all those other like important money-making things that like if you are a SOC 2 company and like at a certain scale, that you just kind of like have to have these things. So I think there are a lot of like obvious wins. And this is just a side commentary. I just want to say, like, I appreciate that y'all are doing this, and I appreciate that y'all are doing this in the same way that I appreciate that Dino and Bun exists, because they have put a positive pressure on Node to improve. And I hope that you have the same impact, because it's like, regardless, I mean, JavaScript is like heavily used, and we just need better package infrastructure across the board. I mean, regardless, hopefully this like lights a fire under somebody at GitHub to be like, okay, maybe we can do better. I hope, or maybe you'll be the new NPM.
Yeah, the old new NPM. We're definitely still close with the team that is there and the folks that are still left there. And we, as you say, do hope it's a positive pressure. There's just a number of things that I think are out of scope for that team and even GitHub itself to sort of support. And I like to say oftentimes we want to be the Google of packages. And today, both GitHub and NPM don't index, dependencies or packages that aren't on their registries. So that's one, sort of, if you're talking about security, if you're talking about observability, and then if you're talking about, potential for money-making opportunities for those enterprises, like you want to know whether or not you're about to install a package from like a third party, somebody's private website. And today you can totally do that and distribute a package on the NPM registry that actually references all these different sort of bespoke package hosts. And there's nothing preventing the various clients from downloading and essentially opening you up to all these different origins that you didn't expect would be a part of your transitive dependency stuff.
Yeah, the homepage for VSR calls that out. So there's tools built into it that like prevent that from happening, like say depending on a GitHub repository where somebody could just like switch the code out unbeknownst to you.
So there's two ways we're looking to address that. One is indexing fully and fully realizing your dependency graph during the indexing or publishing of a package into VSR, or in the future where we will actually have our own hosted infrastructure for this, we can be treated as sort of your new upstream. So we could be a layer in between you and the NPM registry. So today, NPM is pretty, the infrastructure is pretty dumb. It essentially sits there and just hosts these static references and has sort of these weak references to your dependencies. And you'll actually see this in practice if you go to a package page today, and you can go find a number of examples of this where it will show the number of dependencies in the tab for dependencies, and it's completely inaccurate, or the name that it's referencing is not the actual package. It will link you to, a React in the registry, even though that React that dependency is referencing is a GitHub fork or a repo fork, or a private package tarball that, again, somebody has potentially patched, that React. And so that, conflating that package name React with something in the registry and something that is going to come from anywhere else on the internet is extremely dangerous. And so what we will be doing, first and foremost, is treating those separately. And essentially, when you would come to the experience to view packages in VSR, you would be able to essentially see that these two things are different. And so by indexing them independently and creating a strong relationship between those packages, we will be able to give you a more secure, essentially, experience.
I was just going to say, this all goes back to the value of enriching the dependency graph and like making that a first class thing. I feel like there's like actually tremendous value just like right there, like not doing anything else. I mean, obviously there's a lot of technical opportunity and product opportunity across the board, but when it comes to like, I think this is true for the whole ecosystem. We just have to acknowledge that like there's an ecosystem outside of just our bubble, right? This is like, if you're publishing a package to NPM, there still could be dependencies in JSR or GitHub or whatever, someone puts out there. I think if y'all are able to sort of like coalesce this like really rich, enhanced graph of like, okay, here are all the possible data sources and here's the metadata from those sources that we like richly provide you, then that's going to be tremendous.
Yeah, we think there's a huge opportunity once we have those strong relationships. It means you can do some really cool things, including instantaneous lock file generation. Given that you've indexed the entire ecosystem or known, let's say, NPM package ecosystem and resolved all those dependencies, because you essentially have a service that's providing that, that offering. We can essentially know about all the packages available to you. So you don't have to do any of that, range, no assembler range calculation on the client and waste a lot of compute. You can essentially pin or distribute a lock file immediately. So yeah, there's some opportunities there to also provide, performance benefits, not just for the compatible client, but even manipulating the, or modifying the hosted manifests in the APIs and pinning those can avoid a whole bunch of computation for the legacy clients even. So, we could even potentially speed up Bun and Dino.
So you said that you guys want to be the Google of JavaScript packages. And I find that to be a very interesting statement that I want to unpack. Because like right now, it used to be that there was just NPM. You had one place to search. But things like JSR have come up where it's a completely separate registry. They do very different things than what NPM is doing. Do you guys plan to like kind of have your own public registry that is like melding all of these and making it into one cohesive experience?
Yeah. So phase one of this has been introducing the client, which essentially interacts with NPM and any other NPM compatible package registry. Phase two was introducing VSR, which we think is sort of unlocks the ability to self-host and gives you some freedom to distribute packages yourself. Again, aimed at a couple different use cases. We heard time and time again from folks who were either selling their own software or had, private packages that, and teams that they just can't imagine paying, the $30,000, $40,000 enterprise licenses and getting a fraction of the real APIs or tooling to support just private software hosting. So that was sort of phase 2. Phase 3 is to introduce an interface between those public registries, essentially indexing NPM fully resolving, essentially doing a spider's walk of the dependency graph for you. And JSR is on there as well. So the opportunity there would be to point to us as an upstream for either your VSR registry itself, or directly with your client point at our registry in the future. I do not think we'll probably introduce our own publishing destination from the get-go, but it would be on our radar to eventually have you be able to publish into our registry as well. I think the opportunity here is to not disrupt the current ecosystem's way of distributing. If folks continue to publish to NPM, that's totally fine. I think there's a lot of benefits to using us to consume from that ecosystem. If you ever are wondering where the VLT acronym comes from, it's actually virtualized logical trees. So the whole idea is that we're actually trying to virtualize and push upstream the resolution, which has so often, been this redundant compute that we all do on our systems and our CI so often, and sort of wasting many cycles resolving the same dependency graphs. And if we push that upstream and allow a service to do that for us, we can get a lot of benefits. Is that the answer to the Google indexing? It's a very broad, what does Google of packages look like? I think for the JS ecosystem specifically, it's let's know what we're about to install and not have it be a surprise for you.
I think just like the graph, the dependency graph, being able to bring that front and center and get enriched information about it. I do think that this vision of just there's a lot of package registries out there, but here's where you go to find it. Because that becomes pretty big, right? That's a challenge in the space now is now more than ever before, I have so many places I have to go to look for something. It's looking at NPM, and one interesting challenge that I'm really curious how y'all deal with is all the spam that NPM gets hit with these days, which is, I have a lot of sympathy for the team having to deal with that. The T packages or whatever or problem. But anyway, it's between, actually searching on NPM and finding results, or going to JSR or just searching GitHub, it's that's a real challenge, sometimes to find where are the high quality packages, actually how can I find it from all the noise? So just an integrated search product where you can install from one place, it would be super valuable.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of missing, like I said, 1,000 paper cut features that I think that we can execute on. The real problem I think NPM had was we stuck too long to the, PQM scores that were created by MPS. I think MPS.io, we forked their indexing and their quality metrics back in the day, and NPM didn't move off of that until I think just about a week ago. They finally switched to just allow you to sort by downloads. And I think really, if you're talking about trying to address even spam in registries or finding high quality indicators for good quality or high quality packages and during that discovery phase, I think you need more than even downloads. You need a rich set of metadata associated with those packages. And so the opportunity here is to partner with folks that are also doing this work. I've referenced it already a couple times already, but Socket.dev, I think have been doing an amazing job at doing package analysis, whereas a lot of other security companies have focused on the CVE ecosystem, which can be hit or miss in terms of the quality. Actually doing, stat code analysis and sometimes I think they're even potentially doing active or runtime analysis to actually discover, key insights about the quality of a package and potential malware that might be in there. I think that's way more useful than, alerts or advisories, post installation, obviously.
Before we move on to the future facing questions, I want to ask you a little more about hosting paid packages. So it's another thing called out on the homepage, but that seems really interesting to me, where you might be this like Google in this first stop before I find packages. If I could also find packages to pay for, that would be really interesting. So is that something you guys are working towards also?
Yeah. So when I got to NPM, there was a bit of a firefighter moment. It was going through a transitionary period. I think it was 2019. So I was hired about a year before we were eventually acquired. And one of the key things that folks were talking about at the time was both spam in their terminal, and we could quickly address that. But at the time, actually for us, was running his funding prompts and ads in your install output. If you remember that. And that got a lot of noise in the ecosystem at the time. And one of the first things that we shipped in the CLI was the funding feature. The idea that you could, essentially codify some metadata about where to find, sponsorship or funding opportunities for the packages that you're consuming. And GitHub did this as well and introduced something similar around the same time with sponsorships, and actually activated a mechanism to do Stripe sort of donations and monetization that way. But donations are not at all a mechanism for sustainability. And I've seen this play out many times. Marketing budgets get slashed the minute times get tough, and there goes the donations, and the developers no longer can sustain sort of the open source model. And so many people came to us and said, hey, like, I would love to license, I have a separate license for this software. How can I restrict it? And so we've actually got 2 customers right now with 2 different use cases, sort of the private packages, and another one that is essentially a SaaS company itself that sells their software and is hosting packages using essentially VSR. And they have roughly 5,000 customers themselves. So yeah, the future for that definitely looks like, we could help developers essentially get paid for or license their packages. But what is more interesting to me is actually finding a way to operationalize open source in a new way that creates new value, because all of open source's value is essentially squeezed. There's no more money or value to sort of get from it, unless you're trying to retrain models that have already read all of our code and trained up on them and sell that back to us a second or third time. But I think there is an opportunity for runtime, a new runtime or compute offering, essentially, that operationalize packages essentially as a service. And there's a whole category of packages in the ecosystem that lend themselves really well to this. You can imagine like Moment.js being used as like an API, consuming that and essentially paying us for the compute, offloads a couple things, it flattens your dependency stack, and then this service essentially would rev share the money back to the ecosystem. So all of the dependencies in that stack, in that execution, would essentially get money. So in terms of getting developers paid, the long road for us will be this sort of 4th or 5th phase of the platform to ensure that the ecosystem actually becomes sustainable long term. And there's benefits on both sides in the way that I see, us going forward with that product. Is the benefit for the consumer is a flattened dependency stack, less DevOps, and they also get to contribute, into the ecosystem. And the open source ecosystem gets to benefit from rev sharing, that product from that product. So creating new value and then, encouraging folks to love or adopt or tell their, teams to get us into their, CI pipelines, by essentially paying back, writing the check that you're not getting from GitHub today, writing that check for you as a author or maintainer of a dependency, deeply nested potentially in the transitive dependency stack. So while there's opportunities to do what you're saying in terms of a marketplace play, I think the long-term sort of sustainability is where I think we're going to invest time, probably towards the end of this year.
Well, that's exciting. I hope you're successful. I've heard similar ideas in different flavors, and I think it's still something that's needed in the space. It's like one of the sort of classic problems in open source that we've talked about on this podcast, especially time and time and time again, is you have these incredibly brilliant engineers pouring tons of time into open source projects that companies derive a ton of value out of, and then, struggle to pay their rent or whatever. I don't know. It's like, it's a weird ecosystem. But anyway, I hope that whatever you find out there is good for everybody involved. With that, let's talk about the future. One of the things that we like to ask as a wrap-up question is a future-facing question. And for you, it's pretty obvious. What do you think the future of JavaScript package management is going to be like?
Package management and I think package or dependency management, the focus has been performance for the last couple of years. I don't think that that's going to change. Things are going to get faster constantly. Bun and Dino obviously have really doubled down on that. And the runtimes are always getting faster. And I think that that's important. I had a number of customer calls in the last year. The number one line item for most people that I talked to was CI. Like GitHub Actions was the number one cost to the developer tools, and pretty much nobody else had any other costs. Like nobody's paying for anything else but CI and compute. So performance, if you can save somebody time, you're saving them money. And so I think that's going to continue to be the future of our ecosystem, is folks finding ways and opportunities to increase performance. The second thing that I would say in terms of what I see as the future is just freedom and choice. I think, although we have a lot of that in the ecosystem already, at least in package management, it's not that saturated. I would say, some folks feel like there's a fragmentation having 5 or 6 package managers. Well, look at test runners, or look at other kinds of shapes of libraries and projects. Like there's a lot more competition in other places in the JavaScript ecosystem. So I think that the opportunity to offer a new alternative to, especially as I think the biggest player, which is NPM, an alternative to NPM is just more freedom, more choice. And I think, I'm a big fan of what JSR is doing as well. And I'm a big fan of Dino and those folks. So I'm all for more competition, and ideally we get better tools, better results as an ecosystem because of that. And then I would think also we're going to get a bit more secure, and not security forced to us from like CISA and SBOMs that are completely, not usable at all, and not actually tracking real goods or contents of software. But I think we'll get real security solutions like sockets, or in our case, what we're doing is just truly making a real impact by doing and making logical decisions about how we deliver packages to you. There's just a ton of low-hanging fruit in this space, and it doesn't require any kind of blockchain, technology or anything like that.
Well, that wraps it up for our questions. I'm excited for the vision you've laid out. You've already built a lot of cool things, and you're planning on building some even cooler things. So I wish you luck, because I think the JavaScript ecosystem needs it. And thank you for coming on.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thanks, Darcy. This is incredible. Excited to see what y'all build.
Cheers.